I used to think there wasn't a single force in this world strong enough to break the bond between a father and his daughter. My name is Frank Holloway, and for most of my 78 years I believed love, real, steady, unconditional love, was enough to protect you from betrayal. I was wrong. I used to live on a quiet piece of land nestled against a slow river in northern Georgia. It was nothing fancy, just a small farmhouse, a wraparound porch, and rows of tomato plants that never let me sleep in past dawn. That land fed me, held my memories, and gave me something to care for after my wife passed, and April, my daughter, became the center of my world. April was everything to me. I raised her on my own from the time she was 5. I used to say she had her mama's laugh and my stubborn streak. I cooked for her, saved for her, and watched her grow into a smart, capable young woman. And even when she moved away, got married, and started a life that didn't have much room left for me, I never once doubted her love. That's why, when I saw her walking up the gravel path to my house after more than a year, my heart swelled like an old sponge left out in the rain. I thought she'd come to visit, maybe make things right between us. I didn't know she was coming to end everything. They say betrayal feels like a knife in the back. That's not true. It feels like a slow, suffocating collapse, like the air getting thinner while you smile through it, pretending not to notice. When she hugged me that morning, her arms felt stiff and her eyes wouldn't meet mine. I chalked it up to awkwardness, to time. But deep down, something in me flinched. I remember every second of what happened next. The walk to the river, the way James, her husband, smiled was too much. The way April didn't speak, just nodded along. They said it would be good to get some air, like old times. We stood by the water. I looked out at the current and told them this was where I came to think, to feel close to everything I'd lost. Then it happened. James moved behind me. I didn't see it. I felt it. A sudden shove, hard and cold. My feet left the ground. My arms flailed. The last thing I saw was April's face. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just watched. The water was ice. It stole my breath, filled my mouth, burned my chest. I sank fast. Everything blurred. I fought. I screamed, though no one heard me. And then silence. Just the current, the dark, and the crushing truth that the one person I trusted most had let me go. But here's the thing. I'm still alive. I didn't drown that day. Someone pulled me back. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was God. Or maybe, just maybe, it was that last shred of dignity clinging to me like a lifeline. This is the story of what happened after that fall. Of what I saw, what I found, and what I became. It's the story of how I came back, not for revenge, but for something far more important. So if you're listening, sit down. Because I promise you this much, the river didn't take me. And that day, it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. My mornings always started the same. I'd wake up with the first light slipping through the curtains, stretch my stiff knees, and shuffle barefoot into the kitchen to brew a pot of strong black coffee. The quiet was a kind I had come to love, just the creak of wood, the wind pushing against the old house, and the soft clink of my cup on the table. After breakfast, I'd step outside into the garden. That small patch of earth had been mine for nearly 4 decades. I knew every square foot, every stubborn weed, every tomato vine that leaned just a little too far toward the sun. The dirt under my nails never bothered me. In fact, I welcomed it. It reminded me that I was still useful, still grounded in something real. Pulling weeds, pruning roses, watering the young apple tree I planted the year April turned 10, these were sacred rituals. My greenhouse was barely standing, just a frame of wood and plastic that snapped in the wind, but inside it smelled like rosemary and damp soil. I kept a journal there, tucked behind an old pot of mint, where I jotted down notes about weather harvests and little thoughts that came when I was alone. I like to believe the plants listened. There was a photograph on the mantel that I dusted every morning with a soft cloth. April and I back when she was 7. Her arms were wrapped around my neck, and my smile, well, it was the kind of smile that only a father can wear when he believes he's doing something right. Evenings were slower. I'd sit on the porch with a blanket on my lap and watch the light turn gold across the fields. Sometimes I'd talk to my wife, though she'd been gone nearly 20 years. Other times I'd just close my eyes and listen to the crickets. People used to ask if I got lonely out there. I always said no. When you've poured love into a place, it never really feels empty. The silence wasn't hollow. It was full of echoes. That land was my world. It held my history, my heart, and the only life I ever truly understood. I never imagined I'd have to defend it, or that the person I raised in that garden would be the one to take it from me. I was trimming the rose bushes by the porch when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong on a Tuesday morning, and something about it made me set the shears down slower than usual. When I turned, I saw her. April stepped out of a shiny white SUV wearing dark jeans and a jacket too light for the season. Her husband James followed. He had that same polished look he always carried, like a man with somewhere more important to be. They both smiled, but her eyes gave her away. I hadn't seen April in over a year. No calls, no birthday cards. But there she was, walking up my path like nothing had changed, calling out Dad like it still meant something. I wiped my hands on a rag and opened the screen door. We sat inside for coffee. James did most of the talking. He said they'd been thinking about starting a restaurant chain, something eco-friendly, clean, modern. They wanted to build it right here on this land. April nodded, but it was the kind of nod that didn't reach the heart. He talked about investors and opportunities, how the town was growing and how it would be good for all of us. He called the property underused, full of potential. I just listened, holding my cup with both hands, trying to read what April wasn't saying. When he finally paused, I told them no. Calm, simple no. This land wasn't just acres and dirt. It was my home, my history. I said it with love, but also with finality. James smiled too widely and said he respected my choice. April said nothing. They stayed the night. I made them dinner, fried catfish and sweet cornbread like I used to when April was little. She picked at her food. James complimented the seasoning like it were part of some performance. Afterward, they sat on the couch while I washed dishes in the kitchen. I could hear their whispers, tight and hurried. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the porch and sat in my old chair. The moon was low, heavy, like it knew something I didn't. Through the window, I saw April standing in the guest room, staring out toward the garden. She didn't move for a long time. Something about the air had changed. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was waiting. I didn't know what was coming, but I felt it tightening around me like a storm too far off to see but close enough to taste. When they went to bed, I stayed out there watching the light fade from the sky. The wind rustled through the trees like it had something urgent to say. And for the first time in years, I was afraid. Not losing my home, but of losing her. The morning air was colder than usual, crisp enough to turn breath to steam. I was setting out eggs and toast when James walked into the kitchen, cheerful in that way people are when they want something. He clapped me on the back like we were old buddies and said it was a beautiful day for a walk by the river. I was surprised, maybe even touched. It had been years since we did something together without tension thick in the air. April followed a step behind, quiet, her face pale. She smiled too, but it didn't sit right. It was the kind of smile that slips off your face the moment you turn away. James talked about how much April missed the place, how good it'd be to spend some time outside, clear the head. I agreed before I had the chance to question it. The idea of walking the same path we once strolled when April was just a girl made my heart ache in a good way. I told them to give me a few minutes, that I wanted to dress for the occasion. I went upstairs and opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside was a powder blue shirt I hadn't worn since church 5 Easters ago. I laid it out, ironed it flat, then pulled on my gray slacks and the hat April bought me for my 65th birthday. As I looked in the mirror, I felt ready. Not just for the walk, but maybe for a chance to fix whatever had broken between us. Maybe this was it. The moment where family healed and old wounds got stitched shut with words we hadn't said in too long. When I came downstairs, April looked up and froze. For a second I saw something shift behind her eyes. It wasn't joy or surprise. It was regret. Deep, choking regret that she didn't dare speak aloud. But James was already opening the door, already calling out that we should get going before it got too warm. We walked along the dirt path in silence. Birds sang in the trees and the sun flickered through the leaves, casting soft patterns across the ground. I told them how the river always brought me peace. It reminded me of Sundays and barefoot splashes and stories told with muddy jeans. James nodded, barely listening. I started to notice the way he kept glancing at his watch. The way April walked a few steps behind like she didn't belong in her own body. I felt it again. That tight pull in my chest. That whisper of instinct we learn to ignore when it comes to the people we love. Still, I kept walking, kept smiling, kept believing. I wanted so badly to believe this was just a walk, just a morning, just a father and daughter and her husband trying to find something good between them. When we reached the riverbank, James turned to me with that same cheerful grin. His eyes didn't match it. They were cold, distant, already gone from the moment. April stood still, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. And for the first time that day, I wondered if I'd made a mistake putting on my best shirt. Because nothing about that smile felt like family. It felt like goodbye. One moment I was standing at the edge of the river, hands in my pockets, watching the current move like a sheet of glass. Next I felt a jolt at my back. It wasn't a stumble, not an accident. It was a shove, firm and final. My feet slipped on the wet rock and I pitched forward, arms flailing for anything solid. The world tilted sideways and then disappeared in a cold explosion. The water hit me like a wall, punching the air from my lungs. I sank fast, the shock numbing everything except the thought screaming through my head, "This is how it ends." I kicked and twisted, desperate to surface, but the current grabbed me like a rope pulling me under. I caught flashes of light above, blurred by water and panic. My mouth opened involuntarily, and the river rushed in. I coughed and choked, the taste of silt and iron cutting like metal. My hands scraped against something slick and mossy, a rock maybe, but I couldn't hold on. I spun with the current, slammed into something hard, and felt pain rip through my ribs. My eyes opened just long enough to see the sky overhead and April's silhouette on the bank. She didn't move. She didn't reach for me. She just watched. That hurt worse than the water in my lungs, that stillness, that silence. It wasn't James's shove that broke me. It was her choice to let me fall. Somewhere in the chaos I caught hold of a low-hanging branch. My fingers locked around it on instinct. I don't know how I found the strength, but I pulled, kicking against the drag. Every inch forward was pain. My arm burned, my shoulder cracked, but I held on. Bit by bit I clawed my way toward the shore, coughing up water, gasping like a man waking from death. My clothes clung to me like lead. Blood ran down my temple from where I must have struck something. I collapsed in the mud, half submerged, half alive. I don't know how long I lay there. The trees blurred above me. The river whispered nearby, almost mocking. I rolled onto my side and dragged myself into the trees, further from the water, into the brush where no one could see. My body screamed with every move. My chest heaved. My vision pulsed red and black. I curled up beneath a pine tree, shivering. My hand trembled against my ribs, and I felt something cracked and wrong beneath the skin. Still, all I could think about was her. April. Her silence. Her stillness. I wanted answers. I wanted to scream her name and demand why, but there was no one to hear me. Just the wind, the water, and the echo of her face frozen in that terrible moment. I was alive, barely. But in that hour, lying broken and wet beneath the trees, I stopped being the man I had been. Part of me drowned that day. And the rest of me, what was left, was crawling through the woods, not to be saved, but to understand how the person I loved most could leave me to die. I don't remember the moment he found me. I only know that 1 second I was drifting in and out of blackness beneath the trees, and the next I was blinking at the dim light of a fire. The smell of smoke and fish hung in the air, and there was a rough blanket pulled over my chest. The man who saved me said little at first. He was older than me, skin leathered by the sun eyes, steady but kind. His name was Tom, and he lived in a shack made from old wood and metal scraps just beyond the bend in the river where the land dipped and no one ever thought to look. Tom told me the river had a way of giving back what it took when it felt like it. He found me by accident, or maybe not. Said he followed blood trails and broken branches expecting to find an animal. Instead, he found a man the world had tried to bury. I couldn't speak much in the first few days. My chest burned with every breath and my legs wouldn't hold me. But Tom never asked for an explanation. He brought broth in a dented mug, wrapped my ribs with torn shirts, and sat nearby humming old country tunes while I dozed off between waves of pain. His shack had no electricity, just candles and the crackle of a wood stove. But it was warm and safe. I hadn't felt safe in a long time. Out there, hidden from the world, I began to heal in more ways than one. We didn't talk about what had happened to me. I think he knew. Or maybe he had stories of his own that made mine easier to understand without words. Every morning he fished. Every afternoon he repaired something: nets, tools, old boots. He moved slowly, but with purpose, like he'd made peace with every part of his quiet life. When I could finally stand, I helped him gather firewood. My body fought me every step, but it felt good to move again, to matter in some small way. The silence between us was never heavy. It was the kind that lets you breathe. At night, we sat by the river and watched the stars come out one by one. I didn't say much, but Tom never minded. Just being there alive was enough for both of us. The days passed like that, slow and steady. My wounds faded. My thoughts sharpened. And in the stillness, I began to realize something I hadn't dared believe before. I wasn't just alive. I was becoming myself again. Tom had given me more than shelter. He gave me space to remember who I was before the betrayal, before the shove, before the river. And in that space, something inside me started to rise, something quiet but certain. I wasn't done. Not yet. It happened one morning, maybe 2 weeks after I started walking again. I'd gone down to the river alone, taking slow, careful steps with the walking stick Tom had carved for me. The air smelled of moss and old water, and the ground squished under my boots. I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted quiet. There was a bend in the river not far from the shack where the current slowed and the rocks held little pools of water like forgotten mirrors. I leaned down to rinse my hands and noticed something glinting in the cracks. Just a flicker, a shimmer that didn't belong. At first I thought it was sunlight bouncing off quartz, but when I touched it, it didn't feel like a rock. It felt heavier, sharper. My fingers came up dusted with a fine gold powder that caught the light like fire. I froze. I scraped the edge of the crevice with a flat stone and more of it came loose. Small flakes barely larger than seeds, but unmistakable. It was gold, real raw, untouched gold buried in the folds of this forgotten bend. I didn't shout. I didn't run. I just sat there for a while, letting the moment settle into my chest. After everything that had been taken from me here was something hidden, something ancient, something that hadn't belonged to anyone in a long time, and now it had found me. I showed Tom later that evening. He didn't say much at first, just rolled the flakes between his fingers, held them to the firelight, and nodded slowly. Then he said one thing that stuck with me. Gold's like truth. It shines, but it cuts just as deep. We didn't tell anyone. We made a quiet pact right there over the fire and stew. He would help me collect it slowly, piece by piece, without raising a noise. We'd stash it in an old fishing box under the floorboards. No greed, no dreams of riches, just a weapon, a way to reclaim something stolen. I wasn't after money. I didn't want to build or buy or flaunt. What I wanted was a name, a voice, a place in the world that no one could erase. That gold wasn't just metal. It was power. It was leverage. It was a second chance wrapped in dust and stone. For weeks we worked in silence. At dawn we'd dig, at dusk we'd sort. And at night I'd lie awake with one thought in my head. I hadn't come this far to disappear. They thought the river had buried me, but they didn't know I was already digging my way back. Not with rage, not with revenge, with purpose. I didn't want to burn their world down. I just wanted to walk back into it with proof that I was never gone. That no matter how deep they tried to bury me, some things always rise again. The room was too quiet for a closing. You could hear the click of a pen on the polished table, the rustle of a legal folder being opened, the hum of a printer somewhere down the hall. James sat at the head of the table checking his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. April was beside him, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. She hadn't said a word since they arrived. The lawyer, a younger man in a gray suit with a voice as flat as the paperwork, was reviewing the final sale agreement. He said the buyer would be joining them shortly. James muttered that everything should have been handled already. The lawyer only nodded and said there was one more signature needed, the legal owner. James scoffed at that. He said the legal owner was gone, that the state had no body, but everyone knew what had happened. April flinched at the word gone. The lawyer didn't argue. He just said they should wait. And then they did. A few minutes later, the sound of dress shoes echoed in the hallway. Slow, steady, measured. The kind of steps that belong to someone who isn't in a rush. Someone who knows they have the right to be there. The door opened and I walked in. I was wearing a dark suit that Tom had dug out of an old chest, pressed and tailored just enough to fit right. My beard was trimmed, my gait careful but strong. I didn't limp. I didn't smile. I just stepped into the room like I'd never left it. James went pale before he even registered that it was me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. April looked up, blinked twice, and froze like a statue. She looked 10 years older in that second. The silence cracked the air wide open. The lawyer greeted me without surprise. We'd been in contact for weeks. He stood, pulled the documents closer to my seat, and handed me the pen. I didn't sit right away. I looked at James first, then April, then the papers. No one said a thing. I pulled out my glasses and placed them on the table, sat down, took the pen in my hand and began to sign. Line by line, clear, clean strokes, no hesitation, no rage. Just a man taking back what was his. When I finished, I looked at the lawyer and said the words I had rehearsed for weeks. I didn't come back for revenge. I came to finish the story myself. James finally found his voice, but it came out cracked and ragged. He called it a trick, said it wasn't possible that I was supposed to be gone. He stood too fast, stumbled against the chair, and had to be steadied by the assistant. I didn't move. April whispered my name, barely audible. Her eyes brimmed, but she didn't cry. I looked at her and said only this: the river doesn't forget, but it also doesn't hold on forever. The room stayed still. I handed the folder back to the lawyer and stood, adjusted my jacket, looked at both of them for the last time and nodded once. They had taken my silence and twisted it into absence. They had buried me without a shovel, but I wasn't here to haunt them. I was here to reclaim the truth. When I walked out of that office, the sky outside was clear. The breeze hit my face like a blessing. I didn't feel angry. I felt weightless. Justice doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it walks in through the front door, signs its name, and leaves without slamming it shut. And sometimes that's enough. The house looked smaller when I returned, maybe because I had grown, or maybe because time has a way of shrinking the things we once held sacred. The porch creaked under my steps like it remembered me. April was there. She didn't speak. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling at her sides. I didn't ask her why. I didn't need to. Some truths don't need repeating. I handed her the envelope. Inside was enough to pay their debts and leave town quietly. Not enough to rebuild an empire, just enough to start over. She looked at it like it burned her fingers. I told her this wasn't a gift or a punishment. It was a door, one she could choose to walk through. She nodded once and whispered that she was sorry. I told her I believed her. I didn't hug her. I didn't ask for more than that. Some things once broken stay cracked even after the storm passes. But forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't about mending what's been shattered. It's about setting it down and walking forward anyway. James didn't say a word. He stood in the hallway like a man stripped of all his lines. That was enough for me. I left the deed on the kitchen table and walked out without looking back. Later that afternoon, I sat by the river with Tom. We had 2 old rods cast out into the current and not much bait to speak of. He rolled a cigarette with fingers stained from time. I ran my thumb over the notebook in my lap, the one filled with everything I couldn't say out loud. A boy wandered down the trail, no more than 9 or 10, dirt on his knees, curiosity in his eyes. He asked if we were the men who fished here every day. I said maybe we were. He asked if it was true I once disappeared in this river. I smiled and told him sometimes stories get carried off by the current, but find their way back. He sat beside me, watching the line ripple in the water. Asked if it was hard to wait that long for something to bite. I said patience was the only way the river tells you its secrets. He didn't quite understand, but he nodded like he did. Kids are funny that way. The sun sank lower, turning everything gold. For the first time in a long while, my chest didn't ache. My breath came easily, and my heart, though heavier than it used to be, felt steady in the quiet. I looked out at the current, felt the breeze tug at my sleeve, and said more to myself than anyone else. Some things don't drown no matter how hard the river tries. Some things float. Some things fight. And some things come back stronger. That day, I wasn't just a man who survived. I was someone who chose to live.